as you said, suffering is often put forward as the reason for lack of faith.
Right.
And even for believers, suffering can shake their faith.
Oh,
and
yeah.
on a more personal and pastoral level, I know that a Christian response to that is often to point to the cross and the unjust suffering of the innocent sufferer. And I'm wondering how you would interact with someone who said, maybe someone who suffered as a child, as the victim of abuse, which, the suffering of Christ, he was completely self-aware, he was completely in control, it was completely voluntary, and it was completely constructive. So, whereas an abused child, that's destructive and it's powerless, and how would you interact with that?
Well, now, yes, that's right. That's what you do. I would say, if you're talking about an abused child or a person who's really had that level of, has experienced that level of harm and exploitation, two things. One is, in 1 second, I'll tell you how I would respond to that. You just asked me a kind of intellectual question, which is fine. But we are largely the product of the people around us. We have a tendency as Western people to think, I am the product of my decisions and my choices. The older you get, and as you can see, this has happened to me, you realize you're pretty much the product of the people you hang out with, especially in your early days. And therefore, a person who's really been abused is not going to get over a feeling of abandonment from God strictly through arguments or even good reasoning. A person is going to have to be surrounded by a new community of people who love God and love the person and who are willing to spend 15 years not being trusted. See, there's nothing more insulting than if you reach out to somebody and that person's always suspecting you or says, well, I thought you had abandoned me, or I thought you didn't do this, or I thought you didn't do that. And you get so insulted, you say, why would you think that of me? I mean, you get very insulted. And to love a person like that and stay their friend, you just have to know you're going to get insulted. And that's actually one of the ways in which the person is getting re-traditioned or reintroduced to the love of God. That has to happen along with what I'm about to tell you, and that is, I think Jesus' suffering is only constructive in hindsight. I mean, when it was happening, it wasn't constructive, and even though he volunteered to become helpless. It's true that he volunteered to become helpless, but when he was helpless, he was helpless. And nobody at the time had any idea how in the world that could be constructive. It's only constructive, almost from the standpoint of eternity. We're able to stand out here and see it. And therefore, to say we have a whole book, and it's a very long book, and it's a very involved book, that explains how Jesus' suffering was redemptive. And we don't have yours or mine. And to say it couldn't exist isn't fair. My comeback is always, I don't know why God let you be abused. But I still don't know what the reason is, but I do know now what the reason isn't. The reason can't be he doesn't love us. Otherwise, why would he have gotten involved? Why would he have come down and been abused himself, exploited himself? So what you want to say is, it's still a mystery. I don't know what the reason for your abuse is, but I know what it is, and it can't be abandonment. But that is cold comfort. It is really cold comfort just to have somebody tell you that. It has to be something that you hear in the context of a very, very patient, loving community for years. Because the abuse of a child is very trusting and very defenseless. You're absolutely right. The suffering of Jesus as an adult doesn't exactly add up, unless you keep one thing in mind. And this is this. I once saw a cat suffer. As when our cat, we broke its leg once when we were moving some furniture around. It was the most pathetic little thing. It squealed and it had to put its leg up, and it sort of ran around like this, holding its leg up, and ran up and hid in the covers of a bunk bed, and it was just awful, and it really suffered. On the other hand, I've seen a spouse watch another spouse die, and that's a suffering of a higher order, enormously higher. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, as much as the cat, because that's a higher, more complex being. The feelings, the suffering, it's deeper. Well, if Jesus Christ is of a higher order being again, then his suffering would have to have been worse than your suffering or somebody's suffering as a child. And he did it voluntarily. So you have to take that into consideration. You can't say, well, my suffering as a child was worse than his because it was voluntary, he was older, it wasn't. Sorry, you can't do that with Jesus. Jesus' suffering would have had to have been as infinitely greater as his knowledge is greater. So, but all of that is cold comfort unless it's in a community, and it's a very important question, hugely important. That's why I took more time on it. Thanks for asking it.